My name is Sebastian, and in this video I want to show you 10 Vim features that you probably didn't know yet. You might know that I'm a big fan of Vim and I use this editor pretty much every day, but not just because, well, I'm not necessarily a fan of the editor, but of this Vim mode that is just really effective to edit text with. But also there are some interesting features of the Vim editor, and a few of which I want to show you in this video. And the first one that I want to show you is autocomplete. So if you edit, well, any text or any thing in Vim here, you can actually just autocomplete your text in a way that you say, well, hello world, Control P or Control N will just then autocomplete something there. You can even browse through this. So for example, if you say hello and hi and hey, and then if you press H, then it will just give you a possibility to autocomplete, well, your words here. It especially makes sense with some keywords or the word of a method name or a variable name while you editing some coding, but obviously for that you get into the area where using an IDE makes more sense. But sometimes it's helpful if you edit some text, and if you have longer words such as asynchronous or something like that, then once you type once you can just autocomplete faster. So that's the first one. It uses Control P and N for, well, the previous and the next match, so you can browse through them. I typically press Control P while I'm in insert mode, and that works in this regard. Now the second feature is using buffers. So these are file buffers with which we can open multiple files at once or in one session. How this works is, well, you can have some commands for opening up multiple buffers, but in the simplest way, you just go and say, well, I would like to edit multiple files that of course don't need to exist here, that you just provide as arguments when you start up Vim. And now you have this one available, which then just gives you a possibility to browse through these files. So you can then use a command buffer next or buffer previous, in which you can change them. So you say hello world file 1 and hello world file 2, and then you can browse through them quite quickly. So what you can do, you can have these commands buffer next, buffer previous. You can also use, I think it's new for opening up a new file and therefore in a new buffer. I will also link you my dot files in the description down below, because I usually don't type these. As you've seen, I use some shortcuts for them. So for example, I use my leader key and L and H for switching through these buffers, and leader key T to, well, have a new one. And that is part of your so-called buffer list. So you have just these files open and you can browse through them quite quickly, which is just nice because then you can quickly compare the files that you have and also obviously copy and paste within them. So buffers is just a very nice way to handle multiple files and to keep them open, and also to open this up. So just if you use Vim, you might want to get familiar with this thing of buffers. If you want to close a buffer, it is with B and D or exclamation mark to override if you have some changes. So you can do in this way and then close that again. So that's another just helpful feature. As the next feature that you maybe hopefully even know about is recordings. So recordings are really helpful when we edit some more advanced text, and I've been showing this on my YouTube channel before. You might want to have a look at a previous session where I specifically used this feature. What it does is that I say, well, if I have some change here, for example, for the second word I want to make this uppercase, or let's say I want to have both words uppercase, something like this. So I have hello world, goodbye world, hey world, and so on and so forth, and this a few times. So to edit this can become quite cumbersome, but with this recording feature, this works quite well. By pressing Q and then some key for a register, A for example, then you see that now it's recording there, and you can do a few things, and you can do basically anything you like. So let's say we make this uppercase, we jump to the end, exclamation mark, and then we go to the front again and one down. So you already have to think of, well, how do I want to do and end the recording in order to be repeatable afterwards? Why? Because now if I press Q again, the recording is finished, and I can just very quickly execute that again by pressing at, and then, well, the key for the recording, so at A in this case. So in that way, I can say, well, really quickly do this, but even that is too slow because it's a lot of work to do this. So instead, I can say, well, apply this, but not only once, but in this case, for example, 13 times. So I say 1, 3 at A, and that was just much faster to apply them all at once. So here again, once I have, like, these are 13 lines down below, so I can have this for 14 times to do all at once. 1, 4 at A, and that will just apply all of them immediately. So how this works is just pressing Q for start the recording, and then some key, for example A or B or C for some register. And then in order to end it, you press Q again, so you do anything here in between. And then with at A, you can apply it once or some number before to apply it multiple times. This is why I ended it one line below, so that it always like jumps down, for example. But this is very flexible to do all sorts of editing, and in general a very helpful feature. For the next feature, I want to show you this norm or normal command that you can execute with this colon. So if you do some stuff and then you press this colon, then you can write something here. And you can execute some commands, for example, norm, that's typically what I type, which is short for normal mode, which will just execute something in a normal mode. For example, normal mode, I can do something, so I now can type any key that I typically would type in my Vim, and then I can do something, for example, I for insert, and then say hello, and just execute this. So then it will just write hello. Now you might think, okay, that's somewhat silly, what does that bring me? Well, quite easy. You can actually do this for also applying things in multiple times. So assuming I have a lot of lines here and I always want to have a single character or some single form of editing for all of these lines. What works really nicely is if I say I want to select all of them in the visual line mode, and then I can press this colon and type norm or normal, and then, for example, A for jump at the end of the line and append it there, exclamation mark, which then says hello world, exclamation mark for all of these lines. So for example, this works really well if I want to add some, well, invocation here. For example, norm, and then go to the beginning, uppercase I, say, for example, call, brackets, and then some quotes, some double quotes, and do the same thing again at the end, something like this, where you can very quickly then add some invocation. This is what I'm doing quite often. If I have many statements, I will copy them over into Vim, and then I edit this just in a very simple way using this normal command. So it in general just executes anything that you tell it to here. So for example, if I would remove the end again, I could go and say, well, norm jump to the end with $, and then what I can do, I can say, well, delete maybe the last character, the semicolon, so just make an X for delete that. So go to the last position and then delete this, and I can remove that again, for example. So this is what works quite nicely using this norm or normal command, and then with anything that you would otherwise just have in your normal mode in Vim, and that would just be executed, and works quite nicely with the visual selection to be executed for each line. As a next thing, I want to show you this way of executing some commands, some external commands, which are actually the same commands that you would run on your command line. So for example, I can say exclamation mark, and then for instance, cat, and then some file. So if I would create, I don't know, some file temp, do we have file hello world, for example this, then I could say, well, just actually emit this here, and then it will just show this. I can show you again. It will show the hello world. Now in this case it doesn't really make sense, but it depends what the command does. So if the command works with input and output, then you can actually edit something here in your file. So for example, for hello world, you have something like goodbye world, and again hey world and hi world. And now I would like to sort all of these lines. So what you can do, you select them and then press colon exclamation mark sort, which is a Unix functionality that then will just sort all of them here. Or you say, you do this exclamation mark sort and then unique, I think it is. So for just making them unique and sorted here in that case. So you can then use and combine some Unix commands that you would use on the command line, and obviously you can also then call any arbitrary command. So for example, while you're coding or editing text, you can just execute some command and you don't have to switch the windows here. So that works especially well when you use the result in order to work with your text and your text selection. So that's quite helpful. And the syntax is just the colon again and then some exclamation mark and the command that you would like to execute. And then obviously you can combine this with some shell scripting or other mechanisms that work with your input and output in order to modify something. So that's quite helpful as well, especially the default sorting functionalities and so on of Unix. Then what is also kind of cool is that you can open some files and URLs with GF and GX that you can do here. So for example, if I write just the path of this of a different file, so this one is now not a file yet, that's just, I opened up a new buffer, but then I can open and follow this by pressing GF, and then now it will open this up in a new buffer. So now I had this file open, which is quite helpful. Even if you have some text-based documentation on your local file system, you can pretty much have a pointer to another file in an absolute or in a relative path, and then you just open this up by providing it like that. So GF will just then jump to this file basically. The same works if you have some URL here. So GX will just open this up in a browser, and then you can quickly jump to some specific site, which is also kind of cool. So just these work quite nicely by providing these links and then following them. So it's GF for files and GX for URLs. For files, it works in a both absolute and relative path manner. Another thing that you probably didn't know, you can actually encrypt files in Vim by using this :X command, which is quite interesting. So now let's say I open up my file again. Let me quickly close this. This was file text, hello world. And now I go and say :X, enter, and then it tells me to enter some encryption key, for example 123, and repeat that. And now this is actually stored in an encrypted way. So if I press save, now it would be written with this Blowfish encryption utility. And now if I would like to read it, you see, okay, now it's encrypted here. But of course with Vim it works, but obviously you need to provide this encryption key, and then, well, you can edit and write it again. If you would like to remove it, you use this again, :X to change the password, and if the key is empty, then it won't be encrypted, so then it's just the plain text again. So that's kind of cool. You use X, :X to encrypt some files. What is connected to that is another functionality that you can use in a very interesting way, which is so-called autosource. Well, not really a command, but a functionality that you can use in your Vim RC file so that you can set up in a way, and again I will link my .files which point to this. So I have this for some testing purposes for some syntax file, but the one I wanted to show you is that you can have with encryption. So now let me just quickly search this here. That is, yeah, a similar autosource command for just encrypted files. So you can combine this with a file extension. And for me, for example, if I use a GPG extension, then it will also be written, in my case, by the GPG functionality, which in my case uses actually my key that I can provide. So it's a little bit different to what I just showed. So for example, if I say file.text.gpg, then I say hello world, I can save it. And now it looks a little bit differently, but it was actually encrypted using my key. And then you will see that this file is actually there in an encrypted way, where then, well, you cannot read it immediately, but if you open it up with Vim in the same way, it would read your key, it would optionally ask you for your passphrase of the key and then decrypt it again. So that's just another different way. And this also works with the combination of some other functionalities, for example, the syntax highlighting, if it's a file.json.gpg and things like that. So I will link for the dot files way how you can include this yourself, but auto-sourcing is just another interesting feature or way in which you can really customize and the experience that you get with Vim when loading and saving files. And another thing that I want to show you that you probably know, Vim has a spell checking mechanism built in. So if you set this, for me I also have some functionality, some shortcut for it. So set spell, and then you can set some spell language, for example English here. Then it will just, well, have some spell checking here that will just highlight some words. So then if you go and, for example, press it's a Z and then equals sign, it will actually, well, just provide some suggestions if you have a spelling mistake what this would be. Now with this Latin lorem ipsum it doesn't really make sense, but if I just have some other spelling mistake, if I just press this, then it will just suggest something, and then I can press, of course I want goodbye, so I say it should be 1, and then I change this here. And this also has another functionality for grammar checking, at least very, very basic one. So here, for example, it says, well, that should be the beginning of a sentence, so please make this uppercase and things like that. So it does have this as well. But just a very basic spell checking is helpful when you're writing some text, and just for the functionality of including this here, of just seeing, well, the obvious mistakes that you did. And for the other purpose, what you can also do if you have some let's see, microservice, something like that. Well, it knows about these words, but if you had some functionality like, well, I don't know what you would like to include, for example, JSON, but for me, I already added them. So let's say JSON P, yes, that is not known. If it has some unknown word that you would like to add to your dictionary, you press Z and G, and then it will be added to this particular language, and then, you know, JSON P, for example, will be a known word for that regard. So this is just a very basic functionality how spell checking works in Vim, which is quite helpful if you're writing text. Another helpful, more like fun fact, but I've used it once or twice, is that Vim can do very basic arithmetics. So for example, you can increment and decrement some integer values. So for example, if I say 1, 2, 3, 2, 3, 4. If I press Control A, it will jump to the next integer and just increment it. And Control X will decrement it. So if I go here, then it will jump to the next one, and so on and so forth. Which sometimes can be helpful if you combine it with some other automation command. For example, I say, well, do this. I would like to have some list with some numbered list. I say use this recording feature that we had before, copy the current line, paste it to the next line, and then increment it, Control A, by once, and now end the recording, and now play the recording at A again, and play it 10 times, 10 at A, and then you have something like a numbered list. So sometimes that can be an interesting feature by just using these arithmetics. In a different way, what you can also do, so that's quite interesting now, just as a bonus, I've been showing this before on my channels. You can actually include and combine these features with some other mechanism to execute them with a keyboard. For example, I can say, well, write something that should be a command, And then in my case, I have a special binding. If I press the leader key and enter, it will just execute this in my shell. Now for echo, that's kind of boring, but for example, what I can say, well, do some more arithmetics. So what a shell, for example, can do. Now press this, leader, enter, and then it will, well, that was boring. And then we'll execute this and just calculate the result. So this is sometimes helpful if, for example, I say I have some list here, and then in this case it doesn't really make sense, but assuming that I would like to have just these numbers, and let's say I want to remove them. And now I would like to add them all together. So what I do, now I combine multiple things that you just learned. I say, well, have some plus command, remove the last one, take them all in individual mode, press J to join the lines, and then jump to beginning and say, please write something that could be interpreted as a shell command, press leader key and enter, and now I have them all added together. So now this was just a short demo of adding some features here together with this arithmetics and some other features that are maybe not that known in Vim and that you can use sometimes because they're helpful and just kind of cool to show off your Vim skills. So I hope this was interesting. If you're interested in more of these sort of tips, especially on how to become more productive as a developer, you might want to check out my video course on developer productivity, link down below. And if you enjoyed this video, I would really appreciate if you like the video and if you subscribe to my channel. And as always, thanks a lot for watching. Bye.